I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. A Prayer by George Washington. Almighty God, we make our earnest prayer that Thou wilt keep the United States in Thy holy protection, that Thou wilt incline the hearts of the citizens to cultivate a spirit of subordination and obedience to government, and entertain a brotherly affection and love for one another and for their fellow citizens of the United States at large. And finally, that Thou wilt most graciously be pleased to dispose us all to do justice, to love mercy, and to demean ourselves with that charity, humility, and pacific temper of mind, which were the characteristics of the divine author of our blessed religion, without a humble imitation of whose example in these things we can never hope to be a happy nation. Grant our supplication, we beseech Thee, through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. According to Wikipedia, quote, Charles Mills Maddox was born on November 12, 1934, to 15-year-old Ada Kathleen Maddox of Ashland, Kentucky, in the University of Cincinnati Academic Health Center in Cincinnati, Ohio. Manson's biological father appears to have been Colonel Walker Henderson Scott Sr. of Catlettsburg, Kentucky, against whom Maddox filed a paternity suit that resulted in an agreed judgment in 1937. Scott worked intermittently in local mills and had a local reputation as a con artist. He allowed Maddox to believe that he was an Army colonel, although colonel was merely his given name. When Maddox told Scott she was pregnant, he informed her that he had been called away on Army business. After several months, she realized he had no intention of returning. Manson never knew his biological father. In August 1934, before Manson's birth, Maddox married William Eugene Manson, a laborer at a dry cleaning business. Maddox often went on drinking sprees with her brother, leaving Charles with babysitters. Maddox and her husband divorced on April 30, 1937, after William alleged, quote, gross neglect of duty, end quote, by Maddox. Charles retained William's last name of Manson. On August 1, 1939, Kathleen and Luther were arrested for assault and robbery and sentenced to 5 and 10 years of imprisonment, respectively. Manson was placed in the home of an aunt and uncle in West Virginia. His mother was paroled in 1942. Manson later characterized the first weeks after she returned from prison as the happiest time in his life. Weeks after her release, Manson's family moved to Charleston, West Virginia, where he continually played truant, and his mother spent her evenings drinking. She was arrested for grand larceny but not convicted. The family later moved to Indianapolis, where Maddox met alcoholic Lewis Woodson Cavender Jr. through Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, and married him in 1943. In an interview with Diane Sawyer, Manson stated that when he was 9 years old, he set his school on fire. He also got repeatedly in trouble for truancy and petty theft. Although there was a lack of foster home placements, in 1947, at the age of 13, Manson was placed in the Gabalt School for Boys in Terre Haute, Indiana, a school for male delinquents run by Catholic priests. Gabalt was a strict school where punishment for even the smallest infraction included beatings with a wooden paddle or a leather strap. Manson ran away from Gabalt and slept in the woods, under bridges, and wherever else he could find shelter. Manson fled home to his mother and spent Christmas in 1947 at his aunt and uncle's house in West Virginia. However, his mother returned him to Gabalt. 10 months later, he ran away to Indianapolis. It was there in 1948 Manson committed his first documented crime by robbing a grocery store, at first to simply find something to eat. However, Manson found a cigar box containing just over $100, which he used to rent a room on Indianapolis's Skid Row and to buy food. For a time, Manson had a job delivering messages for Western Union in an attempt to live honestly. However, he quickly began to supplement his wages through theft. He was eventually caught, and in 1949, a sympathetic judge sent him to Boys Town, a juvenile facility in Omaha, Nebraska. After 4 days at Boys Town, he and fellow student Blackie Nelson obtained a gun and stole a car. They used it to commit 2 armed robberies on their way to the home of Nielsen's uncle in Peoria, Illinois. Nielsen's uncle was a professional thief, and when the boys arrived, he allegedly took them on as apprentices. Manson was arrested 2 weeks later during a nighttime raid on a Peoria store. In the investigation that followed, he was linked to his 2 earlier armed robberies. He was sent to the Indiana Boys School, a strict reform school outside of Plainfield, Indiana. At the Indiana Boys School, other students allegedly essayed Manson with the encouragement of a staff member, and he was repeatedly beaten. He ran away from the school 18 times. Manson developed a self-defense technique he later called the insane game, in which he would screech, grimace, and wave his arms to convince stronger aggressors that he was insane. After a number of failed attempts, he escaped with 2 other boys in February 1951. The 3 escapees robbed filling stations while attempting to drive to California in stolen cars until they were arrested in Utah. For the federal crime of driving a stolen car across state lines, Manson was sent to Washington, D.C.'s National Training School for Boys. On arrival, he was given aptitude tests, in which it was determined that he was illiterate, but he had an above-average IQ of 109. His caseworker deemed him aggressively antisocial. On a psychiatrist's recommendation, Manson was transferred in October 1951 to Natural Bridge Honor Camp, a minimum security prison in Virginia. Manson had a parole hearing scheduled for February 1952. However, in January, he was caught essaying a boy at knife point. Manson was transferred to the Federal Reformatory in Petersburg, Virginia, where he committed a further, quote, 8 serious disciplinary offenses, 3 involving homosexual acts, end quote. He was then moved to a maximum security reformatory at Chillicothe, Ohio, where he was expected to remain until his release on his 21st birthday in November 1955. Good behavior led to an early release in May 1954 to live with his aunt and uncle in West Virginia. In January 1955, Manson married a hospital waitress named Rosie Jean Willis. Around October, about 3 months after, he and his pregnant wife arrived in Los Angeles in a car he had stolen in Ohio. Manson again was arrested and charged with a federal crime for taking the vehicle across state lines. After a psychiatric evaluation, he was given 5 years probation. Manson's failure to appear at a Los Angeles hearing on an identical charge filed in Florida resulted in his March 1956 arrest in Indianapolis. His probation was revoked, and he was sentenced to 3 years imprisonment at Terminal Island in Los Angeles. While Manson was in prison, Rosalie gave birth to their son, Charles Manson Jr. During his first year at Terminal Island, Manson received visits from Rosalie and his mother, who were now living together in Los Angeles. In March 1957, when the visits from his wife ceased, his mother informed him Rosalie was living with another man. Less than 2 weeks before a scheduled parole hearing, Manson tried to escape by stealing a car. He was given 5 years probation, and his parole was denied. Manson received 5 years parole in September 1958, the same year in which Rosalie received a decree of divorce. By November, he was pimping a 16-year-old girl and receiving additional support from a girl with wealthy parents. In September 1959, he pled guilty to a charge of attempting to cash a forged U.S. Treasury check, which he claimed to have stolen from a mailbox. The latter charge was later dropped. He received a 10-year suspended sentence and probation after a young woman named Leona Ray Candy Stevens, who had an arrest record for prostitution, made a, quote, tearful plea before the court that she and Manson were, quote, deeply in love and would marry if Charlie were freed, end quote. Before the year's end, the woman did marry Manson, possibly so she would not be required to testify against him. Manson took Leona and another woman to New Mexico for purposes of prostitution, resulting in him being held and questioned for the violation of the Mann Act. Though he was released, Manson correctly suspected that the investigation had not ended. When he disappeared in violation of his probation, a bench warrant was issued. An indictment for violation of the Mann Act followed in April 1960. Following the arrest of one of the women for prostitution, Manson was arrested in June in Laredo, Texas, and was returned to Los Angeles. For violating his probation on the check-cashing charge, he was ordered to serve his 10-year sentence. Manson spent a year trying unsuccessfully to appeal the revocation of his probation. In July 1961, he was transferred from the Los Angeles County Jail to the United States Penitentiary at McNeil Island, Washington. There he took guitar lessons from Barker Karpus gang leader Alvin "Creepy" Karpus, and obtained from another inmate the contact information of Phil Kaufman, a producer at Universal Studios in Hollywood. Among Manson's fellow prisoners during this time was the future actor Danny Trejo, with the two participating in several hypnosis sessions together. Manson's mother moved to Washington State to be closer to him during his McNeil Island incarceration, working nearby as a waitress. Although the Mann Act charge had been dropped, the attempt to cash the Treasury check was still a federal offense. Manson's September 1961 annual review noted he had a, quote, tremendous drive to call attention to himself. An observation echoed in September 1964. In 1963, Leona was granted a divorce. During the process, she alleged that she and Manson had a son, Charles Luther Manson. According to a popular urban legend, Manson auditioned unsuccessfully for the Monkees in late 1965. This is refuted by the fact that Manson was still incarcerated at McNeil Island at the time. In June 1966, Manson was sent for the second time to Terminal Island in preparation for early release. By the time of his release day on March 21, 1967, he had spent more than half of his 32 years in prisons and other institutions. This was mainly because he had broken federal laws. Federal sentences were, and remain, much more severe than state sentences for many of the same offenses. Telling the authorities that prison had become his home, he requested permission to stay. Less than a month after his 1967 release, Manson moved to Berkeley from Los Angeles, which could have been a probation violation. Instead, calling the San Francisco probation office upon his arrival, he was transferred to the supervision of criminology doctoral researcher and federal probation officer Roger Smith. Until the spring of 1968, Smith worked at the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, which Manson and his family came to frequent. Roger Smith, as well as the HAFMC's founder, David Smith, received funding from the National Institutes of Health, and reportedly the CIA, to study the effects of drugs like LSD and methamphetamine on the counterculture movement in San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury district. The patients at the HAFMC became subjects of their research. Manson received permission from Roger Smith to move from Berkeley to the Haight-Ashbury district. He first took LSD and would use it frequently during his time there. David Smith, who had studied the effects of LSD and amphetamines in rodents, wrote that the change in Manson's personality during this time, quote, was the most abrupt Roger Smith had observed in his entire professional career, end quote. Manson also read the book Stranger in a Strange Land, a science fiction novel by Robert Heinlein. Inspired by the burgeoning free love philosophy in Haight-Ashbury during the Summer of Love, Manson began preaching his own philosophy, based on a mixture of Stranger in a Strange Land, the Bible, Scientology, Dale Carnegie, and the Beatles, which quickly earned him a following. He may have also borrowed some of his philosophy from the Process Church of the Final Judgment, whose members believed Satan would become reconciled to Jesus, and they would come together at the end of the world to judge humanity. Manson began studying Scientology while incarcerated with the help of fellow inmate Lanier Rayner, and in July 1961 listed Scientology as his religion. A September 1961 prison report argues that Manson, quote, appears to have developed a certain amount of insight into his problems through his study of this discipline, end quote. Another prison report in August 1966 stated that Manson was no longer an advocate of Scientology. Upon his release in 1967, Manson traveled to Los Angeles where he reportedly, quote, met local Scientologists and attended several parties for movie stars, end quote. Manson completed 150 hours of auditing. His, quote, right-hand man, end quote, Bruce Davis, worked at the Church of Scientology headquarters in London from November 1968 to April 1969. Shortly after relocating to San Francisco, Manson became acquainted with Mary Brunner, a 23-year-old graduate of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Brunner was working as a library assistant at the University of California, Berkeley, and Manson, until that point, making his living by panhandling, moved in with her. Manson then met teenage runaway Lynette Fromm, later nicknamed Squeaky, and convinced her to live with him and Brunner. According to a second-hand account, Manson overcame Brunner's initial resistance to him bringing other women in to live with them. Before long, they were sharing Brunner's residence with 18 other women. Manson targeted individuals for manipulation who were emotionally insecure and social outcasts. Manson established himself as a guru in the Haight-Ashbury district, which during the Summer of Love was emerging as the signature hippie locale. Manson soon had the first of his groups of followers, most of them female. They were later dubbed as the Manson family by Los Angeles prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi and the media. Manson allegedly taught his followers that they were the reincarnation of the original Christians, and that the establishment could be characterized as the Romans. Sometime around 1967, Manson began using the alias Charles Willis Manson. Before the end of summer, he and some of his followers began traveling in an old school bus that they had adapted, putting colored rugs and pillows in place of many of the seats that they had removed. They eventually settled in the Los Angeles areas of Topanga Canyon, Malibu, and Venice along the coast. In 1967, Brunner became pregnant by Manson. On April 15, 1968, she gave birth to their son, whom she named Valentine Michael, in a condemned house where they lived in Topanga Canyon. She was assisted by several of the young women from the fledgling family. Brunner, like most members of the group, acquired a number of aliases and nicknames, including Mary Osh, Auk, Mother Mary, Mary Manson, Linda D. Manson, and Christine Marie Ukes. In his book Love Needs Care, about his time at the HAFMC, David Smith claimed that Manson attempted to reprogram his followers' minds to, quote, submit totally to his will, end quote, through the use of, quote, LSD and unconventional sexual practices, end quote, that would turn his followers into, quote, empty vessels that would accept anything he poured, end quote. Manson family member Paul Watkins testified that Manson would encourage group LSD trips and take lower doses himself, quote, to keep his wits about him, end quote. Watkins stated that, quote, Charlie's trip was to program us all to submit, end quote. By the end of his stay in the Haight in April 1968, Manson had attracted 20 or so followers, all under the supervision of Roger Smith and many of the staff at the HAFMC. The core members of Manson's following eventually included Brunner, Charles Tex Watson, a musician and former actor, Bobby Busolale, a former musician and pornographic actor, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten. Supervised by his ostensible parole officer Roger Smith, Manson grew his family through drug use and prostitution, without interference from the authorities. Manson was arrested on July 31, 1967, for attempting to prevent the arrest of one of his followers, Ruth Ann Morehouse. Instead of Manson being sent back to prison, the charge was reduced to a misdemeanor, and Manson was given 3 additional years of probation. He avoided prosecution again in July 1968, when he and the family were arrested while moving to Los Angeles, when his bus crashed into a ditch. Manson and members of his family, including Brunner and Manson's newborn baby, were found sleeping naked by police. Afterwards, he was again arrested and released only a few days later, this time on a drug charge. On April 6, 1968, Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys was driving through Malibu when he noticed two female hitchhikers, Krenwinkel and Ella Jo Bailey. He picked them up and dropped them off at their destination. On April 11th, Wilson noticed the same two girls, hitchhiking again, and this time took them to his home on Sunset Boulevard. Wilson later recalled that he, quote, told the girls about the involvement with the Maharishi, and they told me that they too had a guru, a guy named Charlie, who'd recently come out of jail after 12 years, end quote. Wilson then went to a recording session. When he returned later that night, he was met in the driveway by Manson. And when Wilson walked into his home, about a dozen people were occupying the premises, most of them young women. By Manson's own account, he met Wilson on at least one prior occasion, at a friend's house in San Francisco, where Manson had gone to obtain marijuana. Manson claimed that Wilson invited him to visit his home when Manson came to Los Angeles. Wilson was initially fascinated by Manson and his followers, referring to him, quote, as the Wizard, in a Rave magazine article at the time. The two struck up a friendship, and over the next few months, members of the Manson family, mostly women who were treated as servants, were housed in Wilson's residence. This arrangement persisted for about 6 months. Wilson introduced Manson to a few friends in the music business, including the Byrds producer Terry Melcher, son of Doris Day. Manson recorded numerous songs at Brian Wilson's home studio, although the recordings remain unheard by the public. Band engineer Stephen Desper said that the Manson sessions were done, quote, for Dennis Wilson and Terry Melcher, end quote. In September 1968, Wilson recorded a Manson song for the Beach Boys, originally titled, quote, Cease to Exist, end quote, but reworked as, quote, Never Learn Not to Love, end quote, as a single B-side release the following December. The writing was credited solely to Wilson. When asked why Manson was not credited, Wilson explained that Manson relinquished his publishing rights in favor of, quote, about $100,000 worth of stuff, end quote. Around this time, the family destroyed 2 of Wilson's luxury cars. Wilson eventually distanced himself from Manson and moved out of the Sunset Boulevard house, leaving the family there, and subsequently took residence at a basement apartment in Santa Monica. Virtually all of Wilson's household possessions were stolen by the family. The members were evicted from his home 3 weeks before the lease was scheduled to expire. When Manson subsequently sought further contact, he left a bullet with Wilson's housekeeper to be delivered with a threatening message. Band manager Nick Grillo recalled that Wilson became concerned after Manson had got, quote, into a much heavier drug situation, taking a tremendous amount of acid, and Dennis couldn't tolerate it and asked him to leave. It was difficult for Dennis because he was afraid of Charlie, end quote. Writing in his 2016 memoir, Mike Love recalled Wilson saying he had witnessed Manson shooting a black man, quote, in half, with an M16 rifle, and hiding the body inside a well. Melcher said that Wilson had become aware that the family, quote, were killing people, and had been so, quote, freaked out he just didn't want to live anymore. He was afraid and he thought he should have gone to the authorities, but he didn't, and the rest happened, end quote. Manson established a base for the family at the Spahn Ranch in August 1968, after their eviction from the Wilson residence. The ranch had been a television and movie set for westerns, but the buildings had deteriorated by the late 1960s. The ranch then derived revenue primarily from selling horseback rides. Female family members did chores around the ranch, and occasionally had sex on Manson's orders with the nearly blind 80-year-old owner, George Spahn. The women also acted as guides for him. In exchange, Spahn allowed Manson and his group to live at the ranch for free. The Manson family evolved into a doomsday cult when Manson became fixated on an imminent apocalyptic race war between America's black minority and the larger white population. A white supremacist, Manson told some of the family that black people would rise up and kill the entire white population, except for Manson and his followers, but they were not intelligent enough to survive on their own. They would need a white man to lead them, and so they would serve Manson as their master. In late 1968, Manson adopted the term helter-skelter, taken from a song on the Beatles' recently released White Album, to refer to this upcoming war.
Bad things happen to good people. None of us were ever really born equal. Only one life, there ain't no sequel. Some people live, others stay fearful. This world ain't never been peaceful. You got good, always butting heads against evil. The good try to be fair, but the bad lethal. They gon' fight dirty, every single one deceitful. Stand up, I wanna see your face. Get your chin up like you belong in this place. We gon' train like you've never trained before. You're going up against something that you can't ignore. This ain't a game, this your life that we're playing with. There ain't no reset button or an off switch. You gotta face your fears, you gotta scratch the itch. You gotta break through the walls and get after it. Only time will tell who's gonna make it. I promise you, I'ma be the one who's gonna take it. I fight, I provide, leaving blood on the pavement. If you're up against me, then you better be praying. Cause I'll keep punching till my knuckles start breaking. I'll keep going through the blood that I'm tasting. I won't stop till they've all seen greatness. The battle for my world just started, I've been waiting. Villains and heroes, only time will tell who will win and who will fail. Villains and heroes, no there ain't no one else. Pick a side or by yourself. I got this, there ain't no going back. Leave it all on the battlefield, push the attack. You can't stop me, I'm obsessive. A lot of people think that I come off aggressive, but I'm just passionate. Why aren't you? Ain't nobody care if you got nothing to lose. You gotta put yourself on the line, make moves. Otherwise you'll be a sheep with the lies watching you. Only time will tell who's gonna make it. I promise you, I'ma be the one who's gonna take it. I fight, I provide, leaving blood on the pavement. If you're up against me, then you better be praying. Cause I'll keep punching till my knuckles start breaking. I'll keep going through the blood that I'm tasting. I won't stop till they've all seen greatness. The battle for my world just started, I've been waiting. Villains and heroes, only time will tell who will win and who will fail. Villains and heroes, no there ain't no one else. Pick a side or by yourself. Today is the day, don't waste any time. Know it's time to make a change. Up in your mind, rearrange. Start thinking you're the hero headed out on your way. There's gonna be good times and bad times. That's alright, just stay on the line. Cause in life we all got a different mission, but the good guy always wins, that's a given. If you stay committed, you stay driven, you'll be looking down the barrel of completing your mission. Ignition, light the flame, get the fire and you listen. Take these words deep, cause this is real, ain't no fiction. You don't need drugs, help, any prescription. Just persistence and energy can win any competition. So keep fighting, facing any opposition, and be the hero in a story you yourself have written. Villains and heroes, only time will tell who will win and who will fail. Villains and heroes, no there ain't no one else. Pick a side or by yourself.